Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to our latest Engage EHS webinar. Some of you may be aware we've been doing a series of webinar sessions over the last number of weeks and months, and this morning's one is a live webinar, and we have the pleasure of having some real guests with us with a lot of serious background and knowledge in health and safety. So we're hoping we're going to get loads of questions from our audience out there this morning. So I suppose the reason why we're here, it's a back to work webinar. And when we talk about back to work, it's obviously in context of COVID-19. And we're splitting it into maybe two kind of distinct sections, if you like. One is in terms of how you've been coping up until now. Some of you have been on complete lockdown, others have been working right through dealing with all those challenges. And also then as well, what planning you guys are looking at implementing for the next 3 months, and maybe even longer, who knows. So just a little bit of housekeeping firstly. So we're using Zoom. A lot of people I think now are very familiar with Zoom and how it works. It's becoming one of the most popular webinar tools out there. So we have, we're not going to be inviting people to talk to us specifically, but we have a chat function and a Q&A piece. So you can see on screen there the chat option. If you have a question, please type it in there and we will try to get through as many questions as we can. So we've quite a large audience here this morning, so we will endeavour to get through as many as we can. And hopefully, the conversation that we have with the panellists will cover most of those. If you have a problem either with the audio, hearing the conversation, any technical issues at all, please raise your hand. And we have our team led by Laura, who will endeavour to help you guys out to make sure everything is working smoothly. There's also a Q&A piece there as well, so please, log in and use that as well. But, chat or Q&A is fine for any questions that you may have. And as I say, we will try to get back to as many questions. We're also going to do a recording of this web session, and we will be sending that out to all participants tomorrow. I think the plan is to have it out tomorrow morning, but it will be tomorrow. Okay, so let us crack on. So what I'm going to do is, firstly, I'll introduce myself, seeing as I'm first on the list here. So my name is Billy O'Brien. I am a co-founder and customer success director in Effective Software. I have a background in environmental health and safety management and was almost 20 years with the fire and emergency services and a paramedic. So I have a vast degree of dealing with similar situations, but not quite. I have to say COVID-19 is an exception. So to move on next, we have Matt Askham from OilStates with us. So I'll let Matt introduce himself here as well. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Billy. Good morning, everyone. Yep, Matt Askham here, working for OilStates, covering the UK. We also have a site in Las Palmas, which will be very nice to get to when we get out of the situation. Over 20 years health and safety experience in various industries, ranging from shipping to warehousing, and now heavy engineering. We construct and make and maintain various components for the offshore gas and oil industry. So that's covering everything from CNC machining, welding fabrication, and routing, some of it. So quite a lot there to keep us entertained and keep us going, really.
Excellent, excellent. So looking forward to getting some useful tips on what you guys have been doing, Matt. So yeah, and thank you for participating on the panel this morning.
No problem.
Excellent. So okay, so we move on to our next panelist is Peter Kinselley. Peter is Associate Director with Cardinus Risk Management. So over to you, Peter.
Hi, Billy. Thank you, and good morning to you all. My name is Peter Kinselley. I'm Head of Consultancy at Cardinus Risk Management, and we've been looking at the COVID-19 outbreak and tracking it since early in February. Some of the reason behind that is that we are an international consultancy, so we've been looking at this from a client base who have got interests reaching from Asia through to the US. So we've tried to actually make sure that we've been very much on top of advising people on, if you like, moving to a home working type environment, or how they can keep people safe during the outbreak, to now looking at how they return to work. From a consultancy perspective, we undertake work where we require staff to go out to client sites. So one of our key interests here is, even though we've remained operational, some of our teams have not been able to work because of the current restrictions. So we're now looking at how can we get people back to work and back to work safely.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is the priority. You know, safety is number one, and the health of both the workers and their families. Okay, thanks very much, Peter. And next on our panel is Meirion Williams. So Meirion is Health and Safety Officer with Tuffnells. So, Meirion, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. As I said, I currently work for Tuffnells. I'm the Health and Safety Project Manager for Tuffnells. For those of you who don't know, Tuffnells is a distribution operating system which puts out irregular freights and parcels. That's basically anything and everything, no matter what the size of the parcel. It could go anything from a tree to a small piece of equipment. We've currently got to about 70,000 drops per day, and that's to businesses and also to small customers as well, so to homes, etc. We have around about 37 depots, and we actually employ 4,000 colleagues. My background is slightly different to the other panelists, in that I was a store manager for Tesco's, operating some of their large retail shops for over 20 years before moving into Tesco's distribution, working in distribution for a fair bit of time, and then falling into health and safety. So my background is very much operational, and what my role is in Tuffnells primarily is to make safety simple for our management team. So having been there as a manager, how can we make it so it's really accessible for our colleagues and for our managers?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and I think sometimes we try to overcomplicate things where, you know, simple is always best. Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. And, you know, great introductions, and really appreciate you guys participating this morning, because I know each and every one of you are all very busy. So it's great to have you guys take time out. And thank you again to our audience out there. So I suppose let's crack on. And as I say, hopefully we will, you know, while this webinar is not, you must do this, you must do that, it's more about an open discussion, just some thoughts. You know, hopefully it'll provoke some good ideas, and maybe even some things that people may have not considered just yet, and something that they might look to implement in their own workplace. So it's really an ideas sharing platform. Okay, so I suppose, you know, each and every one of you guys have been working throughout this process, and I know some of the people registered here this morning may have been on shutdown, complete shutdown, or part shutdown, so with office staff and so on that could work from home, have been working from home. So I suppose in terms of what you guys have been doing over the last couple of months, so it's been, what, 2 months now, or maybe just over, what have you guys had to deal with? I'll throw this out as an open question. What are the challenges, you know, like, you've coming from different backgrounds, different sectors, what has been the main challenge over the last number of months that you've had to deal with?
Is from my side, it is continuing to work on the engineering side, as well as complying with HSE, but also dealing with unions. Quite a big issue for us. No matter what we try and do, they always want something extra. So we've implemented cleaning regimes and checklists for cleaning, social distancing, risk assessments. But we've also reduced staff where we can. So we've got home working. We're actually furloughed some people as well. So we're trying to reduce it down to a minimum. Still remaining very busy for our industry. So quite a few challenges we've had. So
yeah, it's dealing with all the changes on a weekly basis that are coming through as well. That's been a challenge, I'd imagine.
Yeah. The key things in the early days for us was about communication in respect to how do we communicate the ongoing situation to our colleagues. One of the things we set up very, very early was we have a safety communications process in place where we deliver through a simple email address, an email account that goes out to all managers and to various colleagues, messages from the directors, etc. And that was continually ongoing. So they had that in the past before this outbreak. And it would be a regular, every Thursday, midday, they would expect some safety comms into their mailbox. It could be something major, it could be something quite small. So we had that process in place from the very, very early days. So that helped us a little bit. As the things continued to change, and obviously our communications seem to be a lot different, based a lot of the time on the guidance we were getting from the government. And also then we started looking at things very, very early on about non-essential travel, social distancing, as Matt said. And that has progressed significantly over the last couple of weeks. The challenges we had as a business was that we were essential workers. So at the time, we also had the Smiths News business as well. And that had a very different footfall, etc. It's what we're looking at. And delivering to customers continually outside as well. So lots of things to look at in the very early days.
Yeah, so from our perspective, from a business point of view, we actually took the approach of trying to provide reassurance to staff. So one of the things that we recognise is that the impact of having everybody at home was going to actually create anxiety, concern, and what, as a senior leadership team, we took some decisions on providing that reassurance early on, and also making sure that we kept in contact with our teams on a regular basis. So one of the things we expected out of our teams was to actually have daily team meetings with the guys, just to actually provide that reassurance. And one of the things that we found is that there was a reluctance for people to use things such as Microsoft Teams and also switch the video on. After now 7 weeks of lockdown, what we found is that Teams is becoming, and the video conferences are becoming much more an acceptable form of communication than it has been previously. And also it gives the opportunity for people to keep in contact. So again, this is something that we've learned to actually use as a tool. And the other aspect that we spend time on is that we've got our client groups. Now, for us as a consultancy, they are external people, but internally, you're going to have your own stakeholders, and actually reassuring them that you're up, working, operational, there to support, I think is a really important key aspect of what we've done during this period.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm inclined to agree, because I think communication, particularly in the early stages, was key to reassuring staff and reassuring customers as well. So making sure that staff knew how to protect themselves, in terms of setting up, whether it's Zoom or Microsoft Teams, how individuals can communicate, teams can communicate and continue to work. And then communicating with our customers to make sure that our customers knew that we were still operating and so on. And I'm sure that's across the board for each and every one of you. And it's good to hear that you reacted very early on that. And Zoom and other technologies are becoming the new norm, which is great. I think more productive.
I think Peter hit the nail on the head. It was a bit about, in the early days, the fearful about being on video and, do I need to wear my suit and my tie and whatever? And it became more, as it's progressed over a period of time, it's got a lot more relaxed. But again, the key thing about working from home was about not being isolated. Yeah. So the key things about, we sent out initially some briefing about how to work from home, have to have regular breaks and so on and so forth, trying to create if you're a 9 to 5 day in the office, then you're 9 to 5 day in the house and breaking it all down. But also we were really fortunate in respect to, we already had mental health first aiders and mental health allies, and we utilized those quite a lot. We did find that people didn't come forward and contact us. We put out the list of who they were and all that sort of stuff. But we decided very early on to start doing what we call the Take 5. And it is a bit about communicating to others. So people in your team, which literally phone them up and say, how's things? So it wouldn't not necessarily be work related, but also getting that communication. Because one of the things you find, or at least I found from working from home, is you tend to be very isolated. You tend to do a hell of a lot of work actually, because you don't get the disruptions or that make the working environments a fun working environment. So utilising those as well, and being realistic about something. I've got to stop. I need to speak to somebody about the football if there was football on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think from listening to interviews and see other commentary, I think everybody seems to be feeling that their time is more productive, which is great. So, and you mentioned there, each of you mentioned practical things, in terms of looking at legislation, trying to interpret guidance and so on. So how do you kind of manage health and safety legislation that's there right now with guidance that's coming through? And, what are in terms of doing risk assessments, each of you mentioned, like risk assessments is the basis for everything. Everything has to be assessed. So how have you been coping with those risk assessments, updating those risk assessments, and then communicating them to employees?
If I start here, and then I'll give a little bit of a view on where I see the law, and then perhaps the other guys leap in with a commentary on how that works for them. I think there's been quite a bit of confusion about the HSE's response in the fact that what they've said is that for things like home working, that there is no requirement for them to undertake individual risk assessments, but actually a requirement for the organisation to undertake an overall risk assessment. And I think that there has been some, if you like, misinterpretation. But I think the key thing around people working from home is that when we look at the risk, we need to actually consider what are those fundamental issues that can cause people ill health. And in this instance, it's that anxiety and those associated mental health issues that could create that. And I think from a traditional point of view, we can look at stuff like, manual handling or transportation and, the like. But for a change, we needed to really start looking at how, as an organisation, can we make sure that we are managing ill health in a very different way. So from my perspective, that there is a change of emphasis. The emphasis actually has gone back to the management team to actually make sure they're doing the right thing, but also communicate it back.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Interesting. Yeah. And
we're a similar sort of thing. We for home working, online training through the provider we've got, which allow for self-assessment of the workplace and give them an understanding. Because you say for most people, it's completely alien to them. And it's interesting. I'm back in work, have been for a couple of weeks, but there's nobody really in this wing with me. So I've got it, not home working, but I've got the loading bit from here, unless I wander up to the factory. But it's a similar sort of scenario. I don't see anybody for most of the day, every day. I talk to Billy now and again, which is great. But we managed to do risk assessments for the work. Our problem was with it, heavy engineering, of it taking bolts apart or welding. How do we tackle that? And that bit was quite straightforward. You've got to look at the PPE because the masks aren't available, and if they are, the people aren't trained. So again, compliance with legislation. We had nobody on site to train how to use masks and do the testing. So we had to go for a different type, which is the powered respirators. Again, okay, so that's fine. We can get those. That's more money, more expense. So we managed to tackle it quite well. And we staggered breaks and starting times and all that sort of thing as well, and implemented the cleaning regime. I think it goes back to what you're saying initially, that there was a bit of resistance to it, and it's trying to keep everybody happy and get them, trusting that what we're doing is right and safe for them. Because you have the flip side where some of the workers really weren't bothered and they'd carry on regardless, and then a lot that wanted to make sure there's enough measures in place. Just it's taken a bit of time to get there, and I think we're at quite a happy place now where people are happy to come to work and know they're safe. As Peter's saying, we're doing weekly checks and daily checks and weekly meetings just to keep, the interest there, and just reassure them really that they are being looked after.
Yeah, no, very good. Yeah, and excellent. Yeah, and Meirion, anything there on your side?
Yeah, on two things really. So just listening to what Peter had to say about people's mental health, etc. So I think there was a stat somewhere that said 1 in 6 people would suffer some form of mental health. And anyway, if we're in this situation we're in at the moment, it's probably 1 in 1, because there's always something there that concerns people. And it's really identified that the assessment isn't just about what you do in work, it's how you do it as well. So it is a bit about, that spending that time with individuals, but also linking into that, what we decided to do was look at all the tasks that we currently do as a business. So from how it comes into the building, how we process it, how it goes out, etc. And we created our whole suite. First of all, a standard risk assessment purely on COVID. And then we broke down our tasks into safe systems of work. And identified how we could manage those individual areas with safe distancing and so on and so forth, and then communicated those to our staff. And as Matt said, certain people took it very, very quickly, and a lot of people, there's a sort of population that didn't see why we were doing it in some respect in the early days. But it was all about how you manage that control as well and communicate it to others.
Yeah. Okay, and like you mentioned, like mental health obviously is a massive challenge, because of the concerns and worries people will have, and you talk about breaking down the tasks, but with people working from home, like they're juggling other challenges, like maybe childcare and other aspects. And is that something considered as part of the risk?
So we had certain colleagues that would like to start earlier in the day before their kids got up, because all of a sudden they then suddenly had to home tuition, etc. So we had to juggle those sort of things around as well with individuals, and that worked quite well, because it was very, very flexible. And as I said earlier on, you find you're quite productive at home once you've got that silence. So it's really accepting that, you might, as I said earlier on, you might be doing a 9-to-5 job, but you might have to alter that position and prioritize what you need to do. So it's getting that flexibility in the workplace as well, understanding exactly what the impacts were at home as well. So have you got that facility? Have you got that, are you able to go onto Zoom? Are you able to have a good internet connection, etc.? All those sort of worries that it's great to put somebody at home, but how are they going to cope with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've mentioned technology, like you've mentioned internet connection. We've talked about Zoom and other platforms such as Teams. So how has technology helped you guys over the last few months?
Well, I don't want to blow the trumpet of Engage. So I know you're not paying for me for this, Billy, but Engage is quite new to Tuffnells and to as I said before, the Connect group. And what we wanted the Engage platform to be is almost our one-stop shop for safety. And as I said earlier on, my role is to try and make things as simple as possible. So we've utilised it for putting our safe systems to work on there, the ones that we've just recently produced for social distancing. And we've also utilised it as well to, it's not so much a policing document, but it allows us for sites to self-audit, to review their processes. And also, obviously, then you can download photographs and so on and so forth, which means that it reduces the need for any regional team to go into those depots, which has worked quite well for us. Early days for us on that, but it's certainly something that we're continually looking at and continually moving forward with.
Yeah, on a similar vein, we're doing the same thing, observations, incident reporting, and it does certainly help. People are out in the yard all the time, lots of many people around in the establishment, so getting information back pretty much live time is very important. Then we can act on it and take it from where it needs to go. So it is very useful in that respect.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think technology is going to play a bigger part as we go through this process, because again, if we're looking at paper and pens and as transmission routes for the virus as well, so it's something that we all need to be careful of and cognizant of.
There's one other thing, Billy, that obviously, sorry to jump in, that, you know, obviously we were going through a process where we were in a position where we had to train our people on the Engage website, etc. So particularly on incident reporting and so on. And the idea we initially had behind that was face-to-face training, because face-to-face training is the best possible means in our eyes, you know, because you can get that feedback and so on and so forth. So we had to look at how we could produce that as an online process. And I hate to call them idiot guides, but we produced simplistic guides with screenshots from the Engage website, etc. So we could actually follow it through. And we shared that with people. And then obviously we use things like Zoom, etc., where you can share your screen and so on. So suddenly you think about, well, those sessions where we had to drag people into from various sites into a centralized location. Could we do that technically wise? And we probably wouldn't have gone down that road initially, because we would have gone to the old traditional, get everybody in a room, get them into a training room, etc. It's forced us into using technology, and it's proved that the technology we have is just as effective.
Brilliant. That's good. And I think everybody is adapting to that. And in terms of Peter, in maybe just to jump maybe kind of back into legislation again, and some of the challenges that I think, yeah, Meirion, you probably have to deal with, and Matt, maybe, you know, it's a challenge there for you guys as well in OilStates. But if you look at the different guidance coming from, say, Scotland, coming from Wales, coming from the north of Ireland and England, how are organisations going to cope with transition? And I know, Meirion, you mentioned it. You know, somebody lives across in Wales coming into work in the UK or in England. You know, it's kind of how are organisations going to cope with that?
So if I start off with it, looking at it on, you know, sort of the basis of any organisation that actually has an interest that spills over into either other regions or other countries, then you need to actually sit down, do a comparison of what the differences are, and then set your benchmark, so a standard that you're going to work to, and it needs to be at least the minimum standard that, you know, everybody wants you to work to. So from an advisory perspective, you know, particularly with what is quite a fast-paced situation, you know, my advice really is that we've also got to look a bit broader to the learnings that are going to come from other countries. And so, for instance, where we are at on the, if you like, the spectrum of our response to COVID-19, we're, you know, sort of in front of some countries, but behind for countries like, you know, China, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. And it's important that what we do is that when we actually go into that planning part of looking forward, not only do we need to prepare to make sure that our workplaces are safe, but what we should do is also plan for any future spikes. So, you know, what we don't want to do is find ourselves that we get everybody back to work and then all of a sudden we've got everybody off ill because we've not taken the right precautions. What I would highlight to you is that yesterday in the press there was a piece in the BBC around South Korea, and that there was another outbreak or a spike in COVID-19 in a nightclub, and what, you know, appears to have happened is that people have relaxed their attitudes towards this, have, you know, stopped looking at their health and hygiene, so and also, you know, probably dropped their guard. So it's really important that what we do is that when we look at legislation, we actually plan, but we need to look forward further. You know, what we need to do is actually make sure that any planning we do, we learn from others, but also we try and make sure that our businesses are as sustainable as possible. So we have to take responsibility on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe one of the big challenges organizations will have is, you know, when you talk about, you know, if an employee was to contract the virus, you know, was it at home in their social activity? Was it in the workplace? And, you know, or does that even matter? Because, you know, at the end of the day, it's the well-being of that employee and all other employees in the workplace as well. So it's, you know, it's getting employees, I think, to communicate to their employer if they're not feeling well, and do that as early as possible, isolate, you know.
Again, Billy, I think one of the key points here is actually making sure that as organisations that we communicate, good health and hygiene matters to our colleagues. We're as a business advising organisations to actually look very much at how they prepare for that return to work process. And the key thing really is not only making sure that you're preparing your workplace for people to come back, you're looking at the vulnerability of people, but actually, you're going to have to go through a form of reinduction for them to be able to understand what you actually expect of them. And where you've got people, like in Meirion's teams who are going out amongst the general public, it's really important that those guys have got some protocols to work to actually reassure them that they're safe, but also the customers that are coming in contact with, that they're safe as well. So this whole piece around responsibility is, huge. So, I really believe that we've got to make sure that people are aware of what is the risk that they face, how can they manage their health and hygiene in a good way, what the expectations from a business are, and also make sure that we keep reinforcing those messages.
Yeah. So, so in terms then of, say, Matt and Meirion, that's, planning for the next 2-3 months, maybe, and as Peter said, look longer term. What is that planning looking like for you guys right now? How are you doing that? Are you doing it as a group, sitting down, looking at the guidance that's coming through, what it means to your business? And then, as Peter mentioned, considering, maybe a second outbreak, in the winter, in the autumn, and so on. So what is the future planning looking like for you guys?
For at the moment, one of the difficulties is because obviously Scotland is following its own advice, which is slightly different to England, Wales, Northern Ireland. As Peter's saying, that becomes more frustrating, I think, for employees. They can see so England, for example, where it starts to get relaxed a bit, and that might promote people to perhaps take more risks, more chances. The frustration grows. For us, at the moment, we're continuing to work people at home where we can. The business is holding its own at the moment. It's not as busy as it was because the drop in the oil price has affected what the oil majors are doing and what's going on in the world. So that's a governing factor. We've got to sort of balance with our workforce as well. But for the foreseeable at the moment, until things change with what the government's saying, we'll continue to manage it as we are doing. We've got to a good place, a safe place, and we can manage it. We're starting to deal with the day-to-day hauliers that come in, for instance, from Russia, Poland, the frustrations that brings, and we've got to put provisions in for those as well, and dealing with goods coming in. So there are challenges coming up each day, but we've got procedures in place, and at the moment it's working. So we'll continue to monitor it and adjust if necessary, but certainly no plans at the moment to return people to work. Stands. So that's
So one of the things that you guys then are looking at, Matt, is anybody who can work from home will continue to work from home. Because I know Twitter came out with an announcement that they're happy for any employee to continue to work from home for as long as they want. There's no restrictions on that at all. And not every organisation obviously is in a position to be able to do that. So that is one of the plans that you guys have where it's possible. That's part of it.
At the moment, yes. And obviously, Nicola's saying stay at home, work from home if you can. So until that changes, then that might put a flip on it. But at the moment, we've got essential people on site to keep it going in a safe manner and be productive. And then we'll just assess it from there and introduce people if we can and when we need to, really.
Yeah.
It comes back to what I said before about the mental health as well, and it suits some people at home, and other people just want to get back as soon as they can. So it's a difficult balance, and it's just to sort of play it day by day, week by week, really.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is changing weekly. So, Meirion, then in terms of your future planning, again, you're an essential service, up and down all parts of the UK. So how are you guys looking to the future?
it's very similar to what Matt said. So firstly, on the differences between Wales, Scotland and England, that really hasn't affected us to some degree, because we've maintained as is in respect to only essential workers are going into work. So the people from our offices, etc., which have now moved into home working, have continued in that basis. The challenge I suppose we've had is that it seems bizarre, because obviously with retail entities closed, etc., a lot of retail entities closed, our businesses got significantly busier in some respects. So we've had the challenges around social distancing, where we've suddenly seen certain spikes in volume and so on going through. But we're monitoring those on a regular basis, and it is things like looking at, yes, we might need additional people within the workforce, agency colleagues or wherever it may be, but structuring that in a place where you stagger breaks, you stagger start times, and so on and so forth. And I think we'll be doing that for the foreseeable future. The other elements is also to learn, to look at what we've learned in the build up to this process, and continue with that, and continue with our learning as well. So here's a case that it doesn't just stop when the numbers go down or wherever it may be, or we go down on the scale that's out there. Is to maintain that throughout. So I think we're in this for the long haul rather than this as a short haul. We need to maintain that. There is a risk that you will relax a little bit, but it's really down to the safety team and the management team within Tuffnells to make sure we don't, and we continue on that trajectory where we're protecting lives and obviously protecting our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feeds into what Peter was saying in terms of that long-term view, that, you know, this could be the reality we have to deal with for quite a while, you know, and there's no guarantees on vaccines or even suitable therapeutics. So it is something. Yeah.
In our scheme of work, obviously, as I said, we deliver to customers, we deliver to people's homes, etc. I really don't think that will, the process that we've got in place at the moment, I don't think that will change going forward. You know, yeah. where you have, for example, you'd have to sign for a parcel in the good old days, or sign the PDA. You don't do that now, you take a photograph of it. And I think that will just maintain, I think that will be the norm going forward, rather than just an exception at the moment. And that's just one small example.
Yeah, and technology is going to have to play a part in that to reduce the risk as well. Anything there, Peter, from your side, just in terms of what advice you would give to organisations to plan for the future?
Yeah, just picking up what's been said by the guys, I think that the most important thing, you know, at this point is, not to rush back to work if you don't have to. And that would be the first piece of advice I'd give you, because planning to bring people back requires you to look at your buildings, look at social distancing, look at the hygiene, you know, some of the challenges of access and egress from the building, and then some of the other advice that the government's giving around use of public transport, and then even the, you know, if we are to cycle to work or walk to work, you know, what are the challenges of that? So, you know, actually looking at that planning, you've got to really sort of sit down and work through this. I think the second most important aspect, and again, we've picked up on this a few times, is who are we going to bring back to work, you know, and who can we bring back to work? And I think they're two separate questions. So the first question is based on, you know, people that are potentially vulnerable because of underlying health conditions, people who are carers, people who perhaps live, you know, a distance from work and will have challenges getting to work because of public transport requirements as well. So, you know, actually, who do you bring back is, you know, quite a big challenge. And then the whole piece around workspace and, you know, planning to make sure that we can keep social distancing in place means that, you know, we do need to take times, and it might require teams to work in shifts or alternate days. But then you've also got issues around hygiene in actually making sure that the, you know, the workplace is being maintained. And then the issue of hygiene is very much based around encouraging people to change behaviour and taking responsibility for their hygiene. So from the point of view of thinking of, am I fit and well enough to come to work today, to, you know, am I washing my hands enough during the course of the day after I've touched stuff? And even small items such as thinking about, you know, actually, how am I going to bring food into the building?
Yeah.
And also during the course of the day, should I actually leave the building, go out for a walk and come back in?
Yeah.
So there's, you know, loads and loads of considerations to look at before you even got to a point of actually agreeing a date for return. And also making sure that from a point of view of when you actually start talking to staff, how are you going to talk to them about that return to work process? So, you know, what we've been encouraged to do is consult. And that in itself presents some challenges because there are different viewpoints from, you know, different people who are perhaps struggling with the thought of returning to work in what they might regard as an unsafe environment, through to some of the challenges that are being thrown at us by, you know, the unions, and that will be a concern in unionised organisations as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was something Matt mentioned at the start as well. So it's, yeah, no, it's interesting. I think organisations are going to have to adapt, and that will be tough for some companies, you know, maybe more traditional companies. But we're now in an era where we have to be flexible with both our employees, and also as well, I think employees have to be flexible with employers as well. And it's that consultation, and I think what I hear from each of you is communication is going to be key, and how that message is delivered.
One of the biggest challenges I can foresee, and probably same for you guys and everybody else, is training of staff, where you know, first aid training, forklift truck training, and the longer this goes on, you've got certification that's running out. You get a very small grace period, but then we haven't got the training providers coming back on and tie into that social distancing for, you know, the more hands-on training. I can see that having an impact if we don't get back to some sort of normality. We have to say, well, we haven't got this number of people now trained, so that part of work can't happen. And then that brings its own challenges with your senior management who are saying, well, I don't understand that. They've got to carry on. So there's quite a few challenges, and we're ourselves are managing at the moment, but given another 4, 5, 6 months, the picture's going to be different. And that's going to be a problem if we can't get something back in place.
Yeah, and that's actually a very good point, and it's probably just looking at the time, because I know everyone is really busy, and there's a couple of really good questions, and I think Matt, you probably have touched off one of them there, which has come in, just in terms of construction and that face-to-face training, and I know Meirion, you mentioned it as well about going more online. So how are you guys looking at that training that? And Peter, you're obviously involved in this as well from your organizational point of view. How are you going to train people that traditionally would be face-to-face training, you know, or maybe requires face-to-face training?
Sorry, I was going to address this in one of two ways. So the first way is that where you require those face-to-face approaches, it's really important that you go through a protocol of checking that the individual themselves isn't presenting a risk to you, and also the group of people that they're engaged with presents a risk to them. And I think it's very important that what we do is that we start looking at the new normal as being almost a check-in to say, I'm okay, are you? And you know, be prepared to talk about, you know, I've been self-isolating, I've not had any symptoms, I've got a risk assessment, I'm following our protocols, as long as we socially distance or maintain social distancing, that, you know, we do that. Now, I do recognise that, you know, in Meirion's example, you know, there might be more than one person in the vehicle, so actually that close contact becomes even more important, and that whole health and hygiene question actually, you know, sort of needs to be considered in much more detail. But again, one of the things that we're setting ourselves a challenge is actually how can we better use technology? Now, with some stuff like, you know, a forklift truck, driving a forklift truck, for instance, you're going to have somebody there, you know, so, you know, but there has to be a way of actually trying to make sure to do that as safely as possible for all concerned.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a similar way to Peter. There is some online training you can do, which is suitable and it fulfills what you need to do. Other training does need a hands-on. Say first aid as an example. How do you practice it? What you've been taught? How do you train for it? There's those to overcome, and it's dependent on the training providers of when they're ready to go back to work and how they can provide the training safely. And then wrap into all this, you can see an increase of cost as well. You know, if class sizes are halved for the distancing, well, that's probably not profitable. So are they going to double the cost? So there's a lot of elements, I think, is going to come out of this in due course, which is going to change the face of how we do things for a long time. Probably things that we perhaps haven't touched on or thought of are going to pop up and cause problems. So it's certainly interesting and challenging, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's one that maybe you guys have dealt with over the last couple of months as well as you've been working through the process. So if you have operatives that are sharing equipment or machinery, so if there's a transition or from one shift to another shift, you know, cleaning down that equipment, you know, that's going to take time. Or how are you managing things like that kind of crossover of shared workstations, I suppose?
It's interesting. It's interesting what you said earlier on regarding drivers in cabs, etc. So one of the things we would do on certain runs, we would have a driver's mate, or for want of a better word. We've had to stop that because of obviously close contact within cabs themselves. So it's now one driver operation. That's obviously then made us look at what type of freight we carry as well. So the weight of the freight and so on and so forth. And in relationship to how we go from shift to shift, that's been a significant challenge in that it does create a small amount of downtime between those shifts as well, which is something we've had to phase in. And just going back to what Matt said about training as well, in relationship to class sizes, where, for example, forklift truck refresher training was 3 people, it's probably now down to 1. Where first aid training was up to a maximum of 12 per class, we're now looking at reducing that significantly down to a smaller number. So there's those things that could significantly change going forward, and will potentially put an impact into time and cost within the business.
Yeah. So I get, yeah, like there is going to be potentially an increase in cost, and you know, for each business to get their staff trained up. Okay, so another question there, and which I found interesting from the UK guidance, was publishing the risk assessments on your company website. What was your take on that? Is it just COVID-19 risk assessments, or I'm assuming specifically it is? What's the motivation or intent behind that?
If I start this, we've looked at this over the last probably 3 months period about, you know, how do you risk assess? The challenge that we've faced with the COVID-19 outbreak is that because it's an airborne virus that, you know, can be transmitted from person to person, and also that it can be transmitted over a distance. It's really, you know, when you look at it from a traditional risk assessment process, it's very difficult to define what's the risk other than coming down with the thought it's high. And whatever precautions you take, the challenge you're going to face is how do you reduce that down further using a traditional risk assessment method or traditional risk assessment methodology. And I don't think actually the traditional type of methods are particularly right for this environment. And again, this is, you know, where some of our landscape starts to change. What I think we need to be able to do as organisations is demonstrate that we've taken all precautions possible, and document that, and actually use that as our basis of assessing our risk response to the outbreak. So, you know, when you actually have a look at the program that you undertake, your risk assessment can be quite complicated, because when we look at the approach we need to take, we need to look at, sort of preparing to go back to work. We need to look at how do we communicate to people, how do we actually bring people back to the workplace, and all that needs to form part of the risk assessment. So in reality, what I see is that we need to actually go through the guidance that we've had from the governments and be able to demonstrate we've considered it and we've done something about it. So my thinking is that your risk assessment is based on your judgment against how that legislation affects your business and how you've implemented it, and therefore how you perceive your risk after you've undertaken that implementation process.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, one of the key aspects as well is showing that you're implementing your control measures you've identified in your risk assessment. So whether that's through audits, giving employees the ability to self-report, observation reporting and so on. So it's making it, I think Meirion mentioned it at the start, trying to make it easy for employees.
Yeah, I think otherwise you're going to make your assessment far too complicated. And we've toyed with RAG statuses, yes/no processes. I think as long as you can demonstrate with against the guidance we've taken all measures, therefore we can assess the risk. Therefore, as you indicate within your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had loads of questions coming in. I think we've touched off quite a lot of them as we've gone through, each aspect. There's some really good ones in terms of legislation, working from home, DSE assessments. The legislation was, I suppose, may need to be revised in certain areas because for some people now, working from home may become your principal location. And so companies may need to look at that and maybe providing more equipment for employees to be able to facilitate that and so on.
Yeah, I would pass just a small comment about that in that at the moment, the UK government are actually regarding home working as a temporary arrangement. So therefore it doesn't require any contractual changes with staff. And again, one of the things I would say to people is that, when we get back to a state of returning back to work, maybe that's the thing that HR teams need to start looking at and then agreeing actually how you support people. Yeah. So for instance, as a business, what we do is we have people working from home. Those that are permanent home workers, we give them an allowance to be able to set up their offices. So, and there's various ways of being able to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've had other questions in relation to carrying out fire evacuation drills and so on. So I know that the guidance in an emergency is that, social distancing does not need to be complied with if it's a real emergency. But in terms of carrying out those drills, I suppose the challenge will be to try and carry out those drills with social distancing, or maybe desktop exercises are sufficient for now based on your risk assessment that you carry out.
So there was some guidance provided on the 9th of May by the National Fire Chief Constables Association on this. So what I'd encourage people to do is have a look at that and also follow the HSE's guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is plenty of guidance now coming through as well. Yeah, I think there are a lot more questions there, in terms of RIDDOR and, how companies are going to report events related to COVID-19. I think, as you said, Peter, there's more and more guidance coming out there, which will help people on that. I think we've almost come up to 2 hours. I know we were keeping the session to around 45, maybe 50 minutes max. Unless there's anything there, you guys, if maybe just to do a quick summary from each of you, maybe starting with Meirion, what would be the one thing that, now I know that's maybe a challenging question, but what would be the one thing for your sector that you're looking at implementing, as part of your COVID initiatives?
The key thing for us is to continue with that communication to our colleagues, so not just the managers, but to our colleagues, and to also get it more to be a colleague-led process going forward rather than a management-led thing. So making the colleague aware that they can make a change, and
Yeah.
they can improve our business as well and make it a safe business and a great and safe place to work is what we always talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. And Peter, anything there from you?
I would encourage those of you that are here as safety professionals to take a little bit of a step back and consider the health of your colleagues, but also when you're considering the health of your colleagues, also think of the health of their families, because a lot of what we do actually have some wider implications at the moment. So, you know, please take an eye care approach to this. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think some companies might have the challenge in terms of how do you identify vulnerable people, you know, whether it's the staff member themselves or their family, you know, and that's where communication is going to be key. Yeah. Okay. And Matt, anything there from OilStates?
Yeah, I mirror what the other two guys have said, really. Good communication and maintain that, so everybody's aware of what's going on and not felt left out of the loop, and so they're still involved as a workplace, and continue with the practices to keep everything as safe as possible, and then just to monitor on a daily basis what's happening out in the world, legislation. You know, we've got projects potentially going off to Russia and other places in the world, which brings up its own challenges. So it's just trying to get through to people and plan for every eventuality as best we can. So that's where we're looking at the moment anyway.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Yeah, I think that's, you know, it's great to get that on what you guys have had to deal with and what you're looking at for the future. So yeah, it's been a pleasure talking through this. Hopefully we've given some guidance and reassurance to our audience out there. We have a lot of questions there. We will get back to everyone. There is a recording, as I mentioned at the start, that will be sent out tomorrow of this web session. I don't know about you guys. I think there's probably a lot more that we could talk about, and maybe in a few weeks, because the guidance keeps changing every so often, you know, and is updated, that it might be well worthwhile if there's a level of interest to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, guys. Everyone stay safe, and best of luck.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.